everyone. You are listening to the Rachael Maves Podcast, and I'm Rachael Maves, your host. Today, we are talking to Misty Her, the Interim Superintendent of Fresno Unified School District. Misty is a dedicated educator, leader, mom, rock star, with a remarkable personal and professional journey. Misty has held key roles such as Instructional Superintendent and Deputy Superintendent of Fresno Unified School District, California's third largest school district in the state, and was recently appointed interim in 2024. She has been recognized with prestigious awards, including the 2019 California Woman of the Year and the 2022 Marjorie Mason Top 10 Woman Award, highlighting her commitment to transforming lives through education and community service. Thank you for joining me today, Misty.
It's such a pleasure for me to be here with you, Rachael, and just to share.
I'm excited to, just hear that you're on, that I get to learn from you and have this discussion, but also just to hear a little bit of your story. The team was sharing some just highlights about where you came from, the story of your family, how you got into education. And so I'd love to kind of kick us off with that of, why did you choose this career in education? Because this is a wild ride, especially as a superintendent of the third largest district in the state. Why education?
I think I have always, from the time I remember, had this desire and wanting to learn, right? And I think a lot of it stems from my mom, because for as long as I can remember, she would always tell me about how she wanted to, all my mom's life, all she ever wanted to do was to learn how to read and write, right? And I remember this conversation with her, and she goes, gosh, I see people and they pick up a book and they can read it. And I would love to just pick up a book and know what's inside and what are you reading about. And so, and I think that stemmed from her, being born into a culture that just women were just not given the same rights as men. And I remember my mom one time telling me a story about how her parents, my grandfather and grandmother, sent my uncles to school, and then sent her to the farm to watch all of their cattle. And she said, I just remember one time sitting there, and as I'm watching, this was back in Laos in our homeland. And she said, I'm sitting there and I'm watching my brother, go to school, and I could see the path that he's taking to school. And here I am, with all of it. And in my heart, she said, I sobbed, because all I wanted to do was to have that same right. And so when I was born, she said, I was so, I was the firstborn in my family. And in the Hmong culture, everyone just desires to have a son, right? Everybody wants it. And being the firstborn, I was a girl, and my mom said, while people were so happy that you were born, there was this sadness that you weren't born a son. And I just, she told me, I felt like I just had to do right by you and by my sister, your sister, that I create an environment for the two of you so you can have all of the opportunities. And I know there's a lot of cultural barriers, but there was going to be a way in which I was going to raise you to believe that you are just as good as a son. And so that has really just kind of stuck with me. And I think, you don't realize it when you're growing up, my mom and I, especially my teenage years, we bumped heads a lot. But as I got older, I realized how much this woman is so courageous and so strong, and had the barriers she's had to break through in her own way, just so that my sister and I can have the opportunities that we've had. And so, and I think going into teaching, it really was, I think I started off at a very, very young age, seeing a lot of inequities, especially for English learners and students of color, just not having, I share this story about, being in first grade and having here in Fresno Unified and being pulled out to do remedial classes to learn how to speak English. And for 3 hours a day, I would go into this class, and in this classroom, we weren't even learning, reading, writing, listening, or speaking. We were given packets day after day, and we were just coloring and filling, in the blanks and just like tracing. And then I go back to my classroom, and my friends were all like, yeah, when you were gone today, we read this book and we did this and we talked about this. And then one day I just told my teacher, I don't want to go anymore. I'm not learning in that classroom. And I think like at first, as a first grader, I knew that wasn't right. And I think that's what's been driving me all these years, is just to look at like everything that we put in our system and all the decisions that we make as adults, that we make because it's easier for adults. Yeah. And not necessarily what's right for our children.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And what a story, Misty. I was jotting down a note and I was just thinking, your mom had a choice. I mean, often you hear that's the culture that you grow up in, the way in which that then gets perpetuated. And she chose a very different path to disrupt and go against actually the culture of the viewpoint of women. And I would assume that had a profound impact of the modeling of that for you as a female, as a child, as watching your mom do that. I'd love to hear, like, how has that, now you being in these leadership roles, how has that influenced you and given you the courage to disrupt some of those things that you've seen?
Yeah, I think that we are, for so many of our families and so many of our children, we're being judged based off of our life circumstances. And then then we start to create rules. We start to create rules for why certain things can't happen, and versus like exceptions. And we create more rules versus exceptions. And I think that what's happened to me is that exceptions were created for me. Exceptions were created for me by my mom, by people who met me along the way that saw something in me, by people who like invested in me and said, I know this is the rule, but let's make an exception. I'll give another example. When I was in middle school, I got into, teenagers, right? And getting into quite a lot of trouble. And my English teacher, at the time went to Fort Miller Middle School, and there was a gate track at the school. And my English teacher just, noticed something, and my history teacher noticed something about me and just said, what if we put her in the gate track? But I was in gate. And they just said, let's put her in the gate track and see what happens. They created an exception. Yeah. And going in there, I totally flourish. When you start to tell a child that they're gay, they start to believe that they're gay.
That's right.
Or, or they start to believe that they have these superpowers that you just have yet to unleash in them. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about like what I do, is because I think I believe we create a lot of rules. And what we need to do is we really need to think at like how our children come to us, the life circumstances that they are dealt, however they come, whatever comes in our way. And then how do we like really look at them and see them for the child that they are? And then find these, find what works for them and unleash it for them so that then they can truly, truly learn. And yet we have all these rules. We can't, because if we do that for this person, then this, and this happens. And we can't, because there's a lot of we can't versus like, how about we find a way?
Yes. Yeah. I just, if I could applaud and bring in all the people to hear this piece, Missy, I think that you're hitting, and it deeply resonates with me because it's part of my like why in education. And I think that having that lens of there has to be an answer. There has to be a way. There can't be the resignation. And from your background and a little bit from my background, it's because of that. It's because based on everything else we experienced, there's no way we should end up in the positions that we did. But through whatever it was, teachers that saw something in us, people holding high expectations, we were then able to move into that space. And it is possible. So to have that driving you of like, no, I know it's possible. Look at me. Like, I know it's possible. So how do we create those pathways for those same kids to see that possibility? It's
Yeah,
powerful.
and it's interesting, right? Because I've been doing a lot of interviews and lots of talking to people, and the question keeps coming up over and over again about why are you working so hard? Why are you doing this when you might not even get the job? And and I'm like, for me, it's not even about whether I get the job or not. It's just about doing a good job, and
Yeah,
it's just about doing the job. And if I do, great. If I don't, it's okay too. It's completely okay. And I just think about this kind of hits with me because there was one interview that I was in, and the person kept asking me about okay, well, what if it doesn't turn out? You have this 100-day plan. At the time we were doing my 100-day plan, and that you've developed, and you've narrowed your goals in the district to 2 goals, a student outcome goal and a customer service goal. And all this for what? Like, why are you doing it? Why does it matter, right? And my response was why wouldn't it matter? Why wouldn't it matter? Why wouldn't we do this? And as long as our students are still coming, and as long as I am taking a paycheck because my paycheck comes from our students. I get paid because students show up to work every single day. And as long as I'm doing that, then I need to do right by them. And I need to make sure that I'm making the decisions that are and whatever we are designing is in the best interest of them. And so the person finally just asked me, are you doing this because of those poor kids? And Rachel, I had to pause because one, it made me really sad that that's how people look at our kids. Maybe not everybody, but that's how people look at our kids. And then two, it made me think about I'm one of those kids.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm one of those kids. And then I just said to the person, I said, I want you to know that our children come to us in the circumstances that they come to us. They may lack resources and they may lack the supports that they need right now. But it doesn't mean that they're poor intellectually.
Yep, that's right.
It does not mean that they're poor in their minds. Yeah. And just because someone's circumstances, wherever they are, whichever zip code, they come from, or their income, their family's income, does not determine their intellect. And I really, that is how I look at our students, and that is how I look at our families. Is that if I think about my own story and how at one time my mom held 2 jobs. She, at night was a night custodian and then worked as a housekeeper during the day. And then her and my dad farmed on the weekends. And then my dad also did 2 jobs. He was a custodian by day. Then he did translating. And that still was not enough.
Yeah.
That still was not enough. And that didn't mean that my parents weren't hardworking or they weren't giving or they weren't doing everything in their power to provide for us the life that, to give us all the resources that we needed. It's just that our life circumstance at the time didn't provide for us. But that didn't mean that I wasn't any smarter or my brothers and sisters weren't any smarter. And I think that's one of the things that really drives me is that. And then that is inside of me. And then, of course, our students that come and they are incredible. They come with their, and that we need to accelerate, then we need to do that. But and when I say however our students come to us, we need to challenge them. We need to have high expectations of them. And I'm not just talking about our kids that are below grade level. I'm talking about all kids who come that are maybe below grade level, kids who come that are not there yet, that are right at the cusp, and then kids who come that are completely gifted, and we need to accelerate and challenge them. Yeah, that is why we exist as a school organization, and that is why we have what we have in our, as the adults that we have in our system, whoever you are, no matter what your position, that is why, we exist.
Yes. Misty, one of the things that I see in you, and I feel like too, as women, maybe surfaces in just a different way, is the job is like almost secondary. It is at the end of the day, whether you get that superintendent position or not, at the end of the day, you have a role in serving kids right now, and you are going to knock it out of the park. Like, because whatever you do, it's about them, right? And you're going to use all that time to make sure that it's moving the needle for them. And the job's almost like icing on the cake at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I truly look at it in that way.
Yeah.
I look at it as like, this is, I owe this.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm just like, I've gotten this interim position and then, oh yeah, it's that I actually owe it to our kids and our families, to do this for them.
Yeah.
And I also think that there's a lot that can come, right? There's a lot of what I try to do all the time is I try to stay very centered because I know that there's a lot of like distractors that can come your way, and I have to just keep reminding myself, like, what is it that keeps me grounded and what keeps me center, so that then I don't get so distracted that I start to lose myself.
Yes.
And that's very important for me. So like, this morning, it had been a very hard week and a couple of weeks. And I just said, this morning I have some time. I'm going to go by a school and I'm just going to spend some time with kids.
Yeah.
And I'm going to drive by a couple of schools instead of taking the freeway. I'm going to drive by some schools first, so that I can get myself centered before I walk into, whatever I'm going to walk into today.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. We haven't really gotten to any of our questions. So I'm going to, I want to know, this is wonderful. And this is exactly, why we do this podcast, Misty, because there's so many wonderful, great stories of people doing fantastic work across the nation in education. And you're one of them. I mean, clearly you're one of them. I do want to come back to just Fresno. I mean, I've been in California for 18 years before we moved. Most of it was in Northern California, but now, in my role at Parsec, I'm actually in Fresno often in the Central Valley, and it is a very unique setting in Fresno. It's such a large city, but it's such a small community as well, and which is just a different look and feel, and relationships are really important. I know that in the last few years, Fresno's been impacted just like all the other schools across the nation. And I do wonder for you, as the leader of this system, what keeps you up at night? What are the one or two things that really sit heavy with you?
I think that one, for the longest time, Fresno, for as long as I can remember, and I'm going on my 31st year, we have always struggled with getting our students, academically on grade level. Mm-hmm. And so that keeps me awake at night. I lay awake almost every night thinking about what do we need to do? How do we need to be different but I think, as I have done that, Rachel, I've realized that I don't just want kids to be on grade level. I don't want them to just learn how to read, write, and do math. I want them to have that, but at the same time, I want them to be good, loving, kind human beings.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot when I first got into this role, and I was doing my listening sessions, and I started talking to students. And I talked to students that were in our system, but I also talked to students who have left our system, and they are in college right now, or even students who are now parents back in our system, or students who are now have finished college and are working. And I asked them the question, and I said, where could we have been better for you? What could we have done that was better for you? And there were students that were coming from all walks of life, right? Students who had, gone to Stanford, gone to Harvard, and then students who went to UCLA, and then students who went to City College, or students who went straight out into the work field. And the one thing they said to me, and the question was, what could we have done that would have been better for you? And the one thing they said was, from all of them, was, it was good that I learned, it's important to learn how to read, write, do math, because I do need to have those critical thinking skills. But the one thing I wish I had known was I had had those life skills.
Mm.
I wish I learned how to work cooperatively with people. I wish I learned how to critically think. One gentleman that I sat across from, who is now working in Fresno, that was a student of ours. He said, had I known the things I knew about life, I don't think I would have been fired twice before I landed in this job.
Yeah.
I would have made better decisions, right?
Yeah.
And so that really taught me that, while reading and writing and math and all that is so important, it is also about like, how do we just teach our students to be good human beings so that when they come back, when they go out into the world, they can be empathetic. They can, they can show love and they can show kindness and they can come back and do the same thing, and give, to our community in that way. Because if we really want to change our community, yes, we get every child reading, writing, and doing math and getting them all in grade level. That's how we change our city. But we also change our city by teaching our students how to just go out there and how to be, just wonderful human beings. What does that mean to be empathetic? What does that mean to care and to give, without expecting anything in return? Those are the things that like ultimately that keeps me awake. And then I think about like what also keeps me awake is that our people are pouring we have 10,000 employees in Fresno Unified, and every day people show up, and I don't think people show up to go, I'm going to go and just do the minimal today, or I'm just going to show up just to show up today. I think people show up and they want to pour their 100% in every day.
Wow.
And I think it's just getting really focused on like, what are we pouring into?
Yeah.
It's because we are a district that grabs onto a lot of things, and we are a district of sight. Like, we love to have so many goals. And what I have found is that it's easier to have a lot of goals because you can hide behind a lot of goals.
Yeah.
But when you narrow the goals, the accountability automatically comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to perform and we have to get results.
Yeah, that's right. And I love what you're saying, Misty, because I do think there's that key component alongside of our academics is kind of the practical application, and how do we show up and engage as citizens in our country in a productive way. And unfortunately, I mean, we see what happens when it deteriorates pretty quickly. Yeah, I love that. So as you're,
and I was having some conversations with some students, and they were, I actually walked into a high school campus and I overheard. So every time I overhear, I'm like, really, let's have a conversation around that. And I was hearing a conversation about just where we are right now with our elections, right? And I was talking to students, and they were like very, in it. And I said, we can have debate, and then we can also have healthy dialogue.
Yes. Yeah.
And how do we have healthy dialogue so that then it doesn't become like an us versus them but how do we have those very healthy, very critical dialogues, so that, and adults to model that for our children so that they can also understand that they can have, opposing viewpoints and opposing perspectives, and that is completely okay. But then how do we take that into a healthy dialogue so that then we become very informed versus just, the things that we pull up, because, our kids have access to information now at the tip of their fingertips. And so I also want them to be very critical thinkers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In our organization, and you've probably heard Babatunde say this multiple times, but he calls it the creative tension. Like how do we have creative tension with one another? We're all on the same team. We may not agree at the end, but we're better thinkers because of it. And I don't know if I've come to the same place where he is, where he just loves it. And he, it's like this deep, exciting thing for him. I'm like, here we go. But it is a huge value. And I think if we can impart that for our kids of how do you do that and do that well, then as adults, we see what the benefit and the fruit of that will be. And that's one piece, Misty, I think that you're hitting on when we look at what are the two ways that we could move forward. As you're thinking about this and the things that you mentioned, what like practical application do you see as steps that you can take?
I think one, I think that like getting everybody, for me, these things are really important, right? Coherence, like calm. I always tell the staff, we're going to be calm, we're going to be focused, and we're going to be steadfast, right? Sure. And what that does, when you have calm, you have focus, and you have steadfast in your system, is it portrays confidence. Yeah, confidence in yourself, in your employees, confidence in your children, and then the confidence in that the public has in you as an entity. Yeah. And I think that, like one thing that I have worked so hard on is to build that calm in our system to say, okay, there's going to be a lot of chaos, but we got to think about what does calm chaos look like? Yeah. Right. What does that look like? And then focus. What do we focus on? And I know we have a lot that we can do, and there's so many things that can come our way, but what are we going to focus on right now? And I'm really big on like one thing at a time and in phases and layering. And so, I'll give the example, 2 goals. Do I know if they're the right goals? But you know what? It's at least gotten us to 2. And then that's one way in which we're starting to turn the ship. And so everybody's focused on that, from like our board all the way down to, our students, to the classroom. Wow. And so if we're all starting to turn that way, then at least there's that calm in our system to go, you know what, there's not going to be a lot of things that are going to penetrate because that's what we're focused on, right now. Yeah. And then staying steadfast with it so that when we see other good, shiny objects that are coming our way, we don't start grabbing onto it, but we're like, no, that's on pause for right now. And so like a strategy that I have is, everybody knows I have this for later folder. And when really good things come and I really want to do it, I have to go, you know what, I'm going to file it in my for later folder because we got to get this first. We got to get this right first. And once we get this, like first phase of it, then what's the next phase that we're going to layer on? And then what's the next thing that we're going to layer on? And then some of it might come from my for later folder. I'm like, I literally have this big giant folder where I'm like putting things in. I've got sticky notes all in there. I've got everything in there because sometimes I go back to go, oh, you know what? I think it might be time to do that for later note that I have put in there. But that's one of the, in terms of what you're talking about, implementation. It's getting everybody there and then getting everybody like on the same page. It's very important. Like one thing I started to do is I started like being in front of principals so that they hear directly from me, just so that they have this arc of learning that they know, you know what, you're going to see it here and it's going to be very surface level right now. But the next time it's going to go in a little bit deeper. And then the next time you're going to see it's going to be the same thing, but it's going to go deeper. And then the next time you see it, it's going to be the same thing, but it's going to be deeper with some other things attached to it. Yeah. So that you can start to build alignment into what you're trying to do. And it's just, it's just kind of like how my brain works. And I just, think in terms of that. Otherwise, it becomes very overwhelming, and so, that's one strategy. The other strategy that I'll think a lot about is simplicity. Like, how do I keep things so simple so that someone can grab onto it and they can go, oh, okay, you're saying 2 goals, 15 points, right? Yeah. 2 goals, 15 points. What does the 15 points mean for me as a teacher? And if I've got 25 students, what does that mean for every single one of my children, that's in my students that are in front of me every day? And then, for the particular student, then what does that mean, by name, by need? And how do I look at that? And so I always try to put things in like the simplest of forms, because I know we can't tackle everything all at once, but we can take very, small parts of it and get really good. And then we can start to, scale up. But in our system, what we haven't done well is we haven't done like very few things really, really well. That's why we haven't been able to scale up. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear that a lot from districts where, if we could just do exactly what you're doing, focus, and the role of the leader almost becomes like shielding from initiative fatigue and really getting clear around the what, then yeah, I'm excited, Misty, just to continue to watch the progression of the work that you guys are doing as it does exactly that. It gets deeper and deeper and deeper. We're going to wrap up with the last question, and this one I'm always interested to hear what people have to say. What is one question in education that we're not asking, but we really should be?
We should really be asking, like, how do we engage the people who we are really designing for? And for me, and not just involving them, right? Because you involve them and then you get it and then you can go. It's like a check off. Okay, we went to this group,
Wow.
then we went to this group, then we went to this group. Like, how do we really engage people in doing that? And for me, that is like what there's a lot we can learn from our students.
Yeah.
And I think that the people we don't ever ask is our students.
Yeah.
And I think that as adults, we tend to believe that we know it and that we have the answers. And, I think for me, sometimes the best answers I've gotten are from when I spent time with our students. And I've asked them, like, I'm wrestling through this. What would you do with it? Or how can we solve it? I'll give you an example. When we got the cell phone, the cell phone restriction, and I thought, the adults, I brought my team together. We were like, well, we need to do this. We got to do this. We got to do this. And so I just thought, you know what? I'm going to be in front of a group of kids. Let me just ask them the cell phone restriction. And I did. And I said, what would you do? What would you guys do? And these were a group of high schoolers. And they said, well, if you ban it, we're going to find a way, because we're always going to find a way as kids. We're going to game you. Trust me, we're going to find a way to game you. And they said, why don't you work with us? Why don't teachers work with us so that we can come up with agreements together? So then I went to a couple of teachers and I said, hey, would you kind of ask your kids what they want to do with the cell phones? And it was a couple of people I knew in our district that were really struggling with kids being on their cell phones when they were instructing. And so I had two teachers who said that they sat down with their kids and they said, you know what? I get it. I understand. Because when I was having that conversation with the kids, they said, Mrs. Her, you have two cell phones, right? You don't just have one, but you have two. One, and in the time that you've been with us, you've checked your phone more than 5 times.
Wow.
Right. And so I was just like, okay. So I went to these teachers, and these teachers said they sat with their kids and they said, what can we do? And they said, well, let's have some agreements. We will agree that when we get into the class, you give us the first 3 minutes to just check our phones really quick.
Yeah.
And then we put all our phones away. And then the last 4 minutes before class ends, you allow us to check our phones. Yeah. And I said, okay. So when I first went into their rooms, it was true. They were all... But then I went back 2 weeks later, and because there were agreements and because there was voice from the students, no one was on their phone. And then the class ended, and the teacher goes, okay, take out your phones. You guys, go ahead and do that while, I'm listing up the homework. And there were no issues, And then in another class that I went in, it was a completely different class. Teacher did it a completely different way. But the kids were like, well, if you let us charge our phones while we're waiting. So when the kids go in, they charge their phones. And then 4 minutes before class ends, teachers lets them go get their phones, and their phone is now charged. No one's been on their phone the whole time, and there's lots of learning taking place. And then the kids check it on their way out.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean when I said, what's the question that we should be asking when we don't ask in education? I think that we don't ask the people who this impacts the most.
Yeah. I love that, Misty. That's like the perfect exclamation point on the end of this. I just want to say thank you for joining me today on the podcast. It's just been a real treat. look forward to continuing to watch your career as you're leading Fresno Unified, and appreciate you giving up your time today.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.